Thank you very much, Chair. The Institute for Government has said that there are 36 organisations involved in either customs operation or policy. They refer to it as a constellation of government agencies, ranging from vets checking for animals, specialists checking plant products, meat, and there's even a role for those who can assess fine art or diamonds. And it also, of course, includes local government, port health authorities and trading standards, so a vast constellation of organisations. My question to you is, to what extent do you feel that the coordination of this incredibly sort of complex group of organisations is running in a smooth and efficient manner? And also, how much of your time would you estimate is now being absorbed into the process of responding to the result of the referendum on the 23rd of June 2016? So I think that's probably a question for all of you, just to get a sense of how much time and two questions really: the effectiveness and efficiency of coordinating. Who are the lead players? Who's making this coordination happen? So we have a clear and cohesive position. And secondly, a kind of sense of the amount of time that it's and perhaps even money that it is absorbing.
Should I?
Sure.
I mean, it's quite an amazing time to be running a ports association in the run-up to Brexit, given the obvious implications for changes at the border and impacts on trade. So there are multiple working groups, stakeholder committees. We have regular meetings with officials and ministers, etc., not to mention appearances before committees such as this. But John's, I mean, probably the lead stakeholder committee that we're a part of is the HMRC's Brexit group, which is focused on the obvious, the customs arrangements and implications at the border. And that, I would say, has listened to trade. And the kind of number one real concern from my point of view in that arena has been on the ro-ro ports, which we mentioned earlier. And then, going back to your other question alongside that, can you just remind me?
It was really about the time that, an estimate of, if you think about your working day prior to the 23rd of June 2016 and your working day now, what percentage of your time is being absorbed into dealing with the impact of the referendum vote?
Well, probably quite a substantial amount, I have to say, but that's what my members pay me for. So we respond to government policy and what is upon us. So.
I would say, from Dover's point of view, of the senior management team, probably something between 20 to 25% of their time is being spent on these types of issues. I think on your first point, Mr. Kinnock, if I may, I think our strongest plea is that these various organisations work off ultimately a common set of data. I mean, I think Mr. Thompson mentioned that just now, that we get much better data coordination between the various principal agencies that are overseeing what happens at the border. I think that would help us all enormously and probably make for a much better system from a security point of view, from a revenue raising point of view, from a health point of view, and the various other aspects which are of those activities which are undertaken at the ports.
There is a border planning coordination group which was set up in March of this year in response to the point that you're making and the fact that we are leaving the European Union. The group has strategic oversight of the government's plans, of the impact on the border of the withdrawal from the European Union. It's focusing on three things: what would happen across all of those organisations in 2019 if we left and switched to trading on WTO rules, what would happen with a negotiated outcome, and in response to Mr. Crabb's question, a longer-term project of how could we become the most effective customs and border operation in the world. We're currently ranked by the World Bank at number 4, We have purchased the IT system which is used by the Dutch, who are currently ranked number 2, and the piece of work that we are currently doing is how could we get to take all of the best practices that exist in the world and blend that together into a single integrated government facility. It's called a single window is the term, which would serve the customer. So if you're an importer or an exporter, you just go to one place, you transact once, all government agencies get all of the data they require, you get all the licenses you require, and then you're free to import and export. We think in a world where you want the United Kingdom to be a great trading nation, that is a good option. We have permission to do that. We've set up a project to do it. If Mr. Crabb had still been here, I could have given him an update. I think I'm already on the public record of saying that is a project in the order of £500 to £800 million that takes somewhere in the order of 5 years. It is out there. It does exist in Singapore. It's called TradeNet. And there is some United Nations Centre for Trade Facilitation and Electronic Business guidance on how do governments integrate themselves around customers. So there's plenty of work going on. All of those organisations are involved in that border planning coordination group, so that what we make sure that we do is we don't get the Border Force to something and then Mr. Bourne does something else and then the Forestry Commission does something else. And so we try to coordinate and integrate all of the moving parts of what we would need to do in 2019 and 2021. I'm happy to set out more if you need it.
No, so Mr. Everitt estimated something between 20 and 25% of his and his team's time is now being taken up.
Management.
Of his senior management time. Are you able to give an estimate of what along those lines?
Oh, it's significant. I mean, it's when I took this job, the then Chancellor of the Exchequer asked me to obviously clearly run HMRC and then go through what is regarded as the largest organisational transformation programme in Europe, and then we decided to leave the European Union, and that was added on. So I would guess it's somewhere between 40 and 60% of my week. 40 and 60% of your time is spent on dealing with the ramifications of Brexit. We've employed 340 extra people so far. And my estimate is that in the end it will be somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000, probably at the upper end of that range.
Have you done an estimate in terms of additional cost to your payroll of that 3,000 to 5,000?
It's in the order of £200 million extra in addition to our current budget. I think that's I don't think.
And that's on an annual basis then? It'll be a £200 million annual payroll addition?
Yes, and next year it'll be more than that because we need to... there are a series of IT changes that we'll also need to make. So in 18-19, the current estimate is around 300 million in 18-19, and then it should settle down around 200 million from 2019 onwards.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bourne, the same questions to you, if you wouldn't mind.
I think for us, as DEFRA, 80% of our work is framed by EU legislation anyhow, and a quarter of EU law applies to DEFRA. So, in a sense, a decision then to leave the EU has a inevitably very major impact. In terms of sort of how much of time is spent by DEFRA sort of as a whole on actual EU exit, as opposed to clearly we have business as normal going on with the EU as well, as we're still members of the EU. I'm not sure I could put a figure on it. I clearly only do my role. From a very personal point of view, I can tell you sort of what time I spend on it approximately. I would think I probably spend 40 to 50%. It's probably fair to say they're often some of the more challenging issues too, I think. So in terms of complexity and difficulty, it probably ranks rather higher. DEFRA as a whole, I think as Claire Moriarty said to the Public Accounts Committee, we are getting a share of the publicly announced 250 million from Treasury for this year, and clearly...
Sorry, 250 million...
50 million was announced for other departments.
Yes.
In terms of extra money, and we will get a share of that. And there will be there's a process, I think, for next year as well. But I can't actually put a figure on what we spend on the borders or indeed overall what we've got at the moment.
Are you taking on additional staff to deal with the ramifications of Brexit?
Yes, we've taken on, I think, 400 to 500 for this year.
400 to 500
Yes.
additional staff.
And I would assume that next year we'll probably, as we get towards a EU exit, in particular the operational side of stuff, depending on what the deal is, that could require considerably more people, but it rather depends on what the negotiated outcome is. So it's really hard to put figures on it.
That's interesting. So you've done some scenario planning, and no deal would probably lead to X amount of additional staff. As Canada type of deal would be another scenario. You've sort of done a bit of wargaming of the different exit scenarios and what that would mean in terms of capacity.
Well, you sort of come back to sort of what Mr. Thompson said, which is, I mean, clearly if we had a business as normal, there'd be no impact at all at one end. At the other end, we can sort of control what we do up to a point, but what we don't know is what will happen on the other side of the border. And for a very simple example, and I'm sure you've come across this, if you look at if we had to do export health certificates for animal products going to the EU, which would be about a threefold increase in what we do now, which is purely for third countries, all of those have to be signed off by a vet at the end of the process. So that would clearly have an impact. But it rather depends on the volume as well. So there are a whole range of uncertainties in this. But clearly, yes, we are planning for, we are contingency planning for day one.
One very, very quick question. Thank you for those answers. What's interesting as well in terms of the impact of that is opportunity cost. So things that you might have been working on, innovations you might have been working on within the context of us staying as a member of the European Union. Have you done an assessment of opportunity costs? So what is it that you, because of what we've just discussed, you're not able to do because it's absorbed so much capacity that you've had to stop your business as usual, aspects of your business as usual, aspects of the innovation and projects that you might have otherwise been working on? It'd be good to just get a very quick snapshot of what you might describe as opportunity cost. Do you feel there has been an opportunity cost? And if so, how serious across your four organisations?
If I can start briefly, I think there is inevitably an opportunity cost because we haven't added materially to the staff to deal with these, but the Chief Executive, who probably would have been here, but he's on holiday this week, is spending a huge amount of his time on this. I think when I look at, we are getting ahead with a big development on the west of Dover, which fortunately we've been able to maintain on programme, but I think where we would have used our time otherwise, if I can put it that way, particularly senior management time, is really in depth looking at how we use that limited space that you saw on the Eastern Dock. You know, could we are about to start a master planning exercise with our key customers, looking at the future, looking at how we bring technology in, how we configure, etc., and we're probably going to have to bring in resource to do that. I think we would have been ahead of where we are had we not been spending time on this project. I don't think it's a disaster, but I think it's desirably we would have been further ahead with the master planning than we are at the moment.
So I've got four drivers really. I've got run the second largest civil service organisation, which is clearly fairly significant in terms of the overall revenues of the country. I've got secondly the largest organisation change programme in Europe. In 2015, HMRC was given a £1.3 billion worth of investment to modernise and digitise the tax system. I've got leave the European Union, and then we had last week's autumn budget 17, which gave me an additional 1,500 staff and another 130 changes to the tax system. And we are currently going through a process of reprioritising all of those, which manifest themselves in 267 current projects. We're going through a reprioritising process which will be given to ministers in January. it's highly likely that some of those projects will need to be deferred or stopped altogether.
Because of
Well,
the
I can't.
impact of...
There is an absolute limit to the capacity and capability of a large organisation. We have to leave the European Union, so that clearly gets a higher prioritisation. Some of the other projects will need to be deprioritised, and they'll either have to take place over a longer period of time, or they may have to be stopped altogether. And that seems to me to be a perfectly good way of running a business. And we've given a commitment to give that to ministers in January and give it back to the Public Accounts Committee at the end of March.
Any other comments on opportunity cost?
Well, I'll just say quickly, as an association, many of our members are looking at new opportunities. There's some are coming out of regulatory rules and regulations from the EU, such as habitats regulations and port services regulation. In terms of the kind of new business and new trade, I mean, some ports, particularly say on the east coast with intra-EU facing traffic, are probably looking at similar trade levels, but then trying to deal with the operational challenges arising from things like declarations and port health checks, etc. Other ports elsewhere looking at new business routes and links externally in third countries, but at the moment we're leaving that to them. We haven't done any central assessment of that now. I think government is working on things internally, and we're just starting to talk with officials on that type of initiative.
Right.